My name is Lena, and I'm here with my co-president, Riza. We are the co-presidents for the Ontario Tech University's Women in Engineering Society. Together, we would like to welcome you all to the National Day of Remembrance and Action on Violence Against Women. I would first like to welcome President of Ontario Tech University, President Stephen Murphy, to say a few words.
Great. Thank you so much, Lena, and thanks, folks, for joining us. Firstly, thank you, Lena, to your group for being so proactive in organizing today's event. It's very, very important. As people know, on Sunday, we will acknowledge the 31st anniversary of the shootings in Montreal, the Montreal Massacre. And very, very important, obviously, to always remember those deaths and to think about our commitment to ending gender-based violence and to act upon that desire. In those 31 years, it would be great to be able to look at you today and say, we have made such tremendous strides and something like that could not happen again. Unfortunately, as we know, as our society continues to evolve and as researchers like Barb Perry at our university know as well, unfortunately, attitudes are alive and well that might perpetuate this. I think that it's very important for us as a university community to lead and to realize that forms of gender-based violence start at all different levels, whether those be microaggressions, whether that be violence that we can see and then violence that we can't see. And we need to acknowledge it, and we need to make a commitment to calling it out in all of our spaces, both within our university and outside of that. So today is a very important day. It's going to mean something to each of us. We'll all remember back to where we were in 1989 when this happened, and how it profoundly changed the lives of those of us who certainly were around, and hats off to our students for carrying on this tradition. They may not have been alive at the time, but this is certainly something that shook our nation, but really awakened us collectively to something that, you know, needed our attention far earlier than that. So the extent that we can continue to not just make this a day, but to continue to make this a continued effort to eliminate gender-based violence is a goal worth pursuing. Thank you for having me here today.
Thank you, President Stephen. Next, I would like to welcome Provost Lori Livingston to say a few words.
Thanks very much, Lena. And like President Murphy, thank you for the invitation to speak today. I think we appropriately gather here on this day of National Remembrance and Action on Violence Against Women to remember the lives lost at École Polytechnique, as well as those of many others. But I thought in making my comments today, I would make them via a story. And this story is one that is very close to me. So I want to tell everyone about a young woman by the name of Joan Heinbecker. In June of 1993, Joan graduated with an honors degree from Wilfrid Laurier University. She was also recognized as the top graduating undergraduate student from the university that year, and she was awarded the Governor General's Gold Medal as a result of having a nearly perfect GPA. In September that year, she began her studies towards a master's degree at McMaster University. And she was looking forward to a career doing research in the area of pediatric health. She had a very bright future ahead of her, and all was going well until March of that year, March of 1994, when an ex-boyfriend without an invitation entered her residence room with a sawed-off shotgun and took her life. I knew Joan well, and I bring this story to you today to ask you to join me in remembering her, but also, importantly, to remind us that all violence against women is never acceptable. The loss of great people and great minds is too great a price to pay. And to this end, let's acknowledge that we all have an important role to play going forward in speaking out against these acts of violence and ending the violence in hopefully the not too distant future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lori. Now we would like to welcome the Dean of Faculty of Engineering and Applied Science, Dr. Hussein Kashawi.
Thank you, Lena. Good afternoon, everyone. 31 years ago, 14 women lost their lives during mass shooting at École Polytechnique. They were murdered not because of any reason except being women. Someone felt he had the right to deny them the right to study and pursue career in engineering. I would like to reflect today on this as a senior engineering student at the time in Cairo, Egypt. I remember the day very well. I still remember the shock that myself and a friend of mine had when we were reading this in a newspaper. We were shocked not only because of the murder, but also because it happened in Canada. We understood that discrimination can happen at any time, at anywhere, at any time, and nothing should be taken for granted, even if you are not living in a third world country. And effort must be made, always must be made, to prevent this kind of discrimination or any kind of discrimination. We are gathered virtually today to remember and to renew our commitment to ensure that women have equal rights to study what they desire and pursue the career they want. And such a crime shall not happen again. I shared with my colleagues before, and I would like to say today that genuine inclusivity is the responsibility of each one of us. And it is our duty to foster it at home, at the workplace, and in the classroom. We should see no difference in people's gender, background, sexual orientation, religion, color, or any kind of difference. But we should recognize the contribution, positive contribution of each person without asking who is this person or where this person is coming from. Thank you.
Thank you, Dean Kashawi. And finally, we would like to welcome Dr. Barbara Perry, the Director of the Center on Hate, Bias, and Extremism, to say a few words.
Well, thank you, and thank you for partnering with us in this important event. So crucial that we remember the events of over 30 years ago now. I think it's important for us to also acknowledge that the sort of violence that we saw, the misogynistic violence that we saw 30 years ago, is certainly not a thing of the past. Indeed, the ideas that shaped the killer's actions on that day continue to resonate, and probably even more so in the manosphere, very widely disseminated, obviously, online now, and influencing the actions of others, as we've seen in recent years in Canada and around the globe. We need to continue to remember the horrific events and that we commemorate today, and to be vigilant and willing to confront the narratives that shape the kind of violence that we are here to acknowledge, and that put women's lives at risk across the country, across the world. Many of you, of course, won't have a memory of your own, a real-time memory of those events long before you were with us, but hopefully today's events will bring you into the conversation about how to better understand and challenge misogyny and violence wherever they occur in our communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Perry. Welcome, everyone. So today we are here to remember the attack at École Polytechnique de Montreal. On this day in 1989, a man who was determined to fight feminism took the lives of 14 engineering students and staff. These young women had chosen to pursue their love of engineering and science, despite the fact that engineering has traditionally been a male-dominated profession. And it is for this reason that they were murdered in what continues to be the deadliest mass shooting in Canadian history. The tragedy that this day rippled across Canada and the world and continues to shine a light on acts of violence that are directed against women, that has led to conversations within our classrooms, work, and homes about inequality in the workforce, abusive relationships, sexual harassment, and assault against women and other marginalized groups. But there is still an enormous amount of work to still be done. Today, women are still 11 times more likely than men to be the victim of sexual offenses. and is 3 times as likely to be the victim of criminal harassment. And when looking at risk factors of violence against women, being young was a consistent factor. The structural and systematic forms of violence against women must be addressed and ended. While today we mourn the lives that were lost, we also want to remind you of the many females who graduated from engineering around the time of the massacre. While Ontario Tech University engineering did not yet exist, these women exemplify the value that women bring to the engineering profession and to society. Today, we have a special speaker with us, Shannon M. Poole, a material engineer graduate from McMaster, who will share a few words with us.
Thank you, Lena, and thank you everyone for being here today. I'm honored to be one of the speakers, to be part of this event. I am a materials engineering graduate student from McMaster University, actually. So I have heard the story that Lori shared about her friend before, and I'll actually get to that in a moment. So my now role is all about guiding lost souls home, and I wanted to bring some of that to the memorial today and invite you to all, while we use this time to honor and remember the women from 31 years ago, also to use it as an opportunity for your own healing and forgiveness, and using that as a light to be able to inspire other people to make better choices in the future. As I mentioned, I am from McMaster, and so the first December 6th memorial that I attended was when I was a first year back in 2006. So while I was technically alive when the act happened, I have no memory of it. I was too young. And on the day, I remember the first memorial being a lot about learning for me about what had happened. And that one also included remembering the missing and murdered Aboriginal women across Canada, and the number of that shocked me. However, what hit closer to home for me and what made it real was hearing the stories of the women on McMaster's campus who had been assaulted and murdered in the hallways I walked, in the residence I lived in, on the very grounds that had become my home that semester. It was mind-boggling to me that something like that could happen on this beautiful campus where I'd had so much fun with my friends. And I share this because I as an engineering student, I can resonate with, the experiences of being a woman in the field. And I'd had so many positive experiences interacting with male students, male staff, male professors. It was simply shocking. And that's where I wanted to bring in, that was over 10 years ago now that I first learned about these events and became in the world. And since then, I've gone on to do a lot of work in women's empowerment. And one of the things that I've learned is that, and really grown to embrace, is that people do the best they can with the resources they have in the moment. And so when people act in the ways that we would call heinous, cruel, and terrible, it also means that the resources were so depleted that those awful actions were the only choice they could see in the moment. So while no one will ever forgive or forget or approve in any way of the actions, if we can take a moment to empathize with maybe the state that they were in, we can use it as an impetus for our own healing and forgiveness journey so that we can be a light for other people to make different choices. Because we can see how they could have chosen differently. We can see how they could have done differently. We can see the systems that were in place that led to these choices, and we can see how they're completely unacceptable then and now. A tiny story I want to share with you is from a few months ago, in my own life. It was a day that, with all of this COVID fatigue happening and whatever else was going on in my life that day, by the end of the day, I was exhausted. My mental capacity was very diminished. And, well, I left squash on the stove as the way I was putting it away that day. And that was simply my best choice in the moment. Kind of a silly story. And at the same time, in that moment, me putting the squash away for the night was putting it on the stove. not putting in a container in the fridge, which any normal, regular human would, and how my humanness the next day was like, that's the logical choice. But in that moment, that was my best choice. We woke up the next day, found the squash on the stove still, and my husband asked, like, why did you do this? And I went, I have no idea. It was my best choice in the moment. I clearly needed more sleep and to do different things that day. And I share this as a way to begin to have that empathy with where they must have been such that that was their best choice. And again, to invite you to begin your own healing and forgiveness journey. Because to heal is to forgive. And while there's no forgetting, we can heal the wounds. As the engineering profession, and as I learned, as I went on through my own journey of learning and discovery after my first memorial, our Indigenous sisters and all humans who've been touched by violence and trauma, we remember the act. And in that, we can create opportunities for the next disheartened, disgruntled person to make a different choice. As we heal our wounds, we show those who are hurting that they can heal too, that there's other options, that there's different choices. As we remember, let us also forgive and raise our frequency to one of healing for these tragic events and all the events that have touched our lives. Healing is a journey, and I really, truly invite you to be in yours today. From this space where we can build our own capacity, maximize our energy and our resources, so we have the ability to make different choices. We truly make it possible for other people to do it. Through informal mentoring, just watching people do different acts, we can learn how we can do differently ourselves. And so as you begin your own healing journey today, from remembering what can happen when people have depleted resources themselves and when the systems are set up to encourage those choices or to support those choices, I encourage you to ask yourself, what do I need most? What am I missing most right now? And how can I get or do that thing? And through that involved reaching out to a friend or a family member or professional to say, hey, this is how I'm hurting. I want to stop it. This is what I think I'm missing. And I want to be able to do differently. Reaching out into being in community, as we all know, we need that more than ever with the year we've all had. Because there are ways to find different resources. There are ways to rebuild our capacity to do different things. And there's ways to heal while honoring and remembering, and to be that spark for other people to change the system, to speak up instead of staying silent, to act and be in action for inclusivity and diversity and equitable practices, so that we never have to relive something that happened so many years ago. So thank you again for inviting me to share some words with you. And I truly hope that this at least begins or continues some healing and forgiveness for you, so we can all be lights to inspire the next person who maybe tries to go down this awful path to do differently and to reach out for help instead. Thank you.
Thank you, Shannon. Next, I would like to call upon another talented speaker, Dr. Shahid Alvi, Faculty of Social Sciences and Humanities at Ontario Tech University, to say a few words.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. When the Montreal Massacre happened, we were not just shocked by one of the worst mass killings in Canadian history, but also by the blatantly anti-woman motives underpinning it. This was an act of terrorism by a man who hated feminists and women. He took out his hatred on 14 female engineering students because he thought that women should not be studying engineering. He wanted to kill more women. He had a list. He left a note saying he hated feminists. Thinking Canadians began to realize that violence against women is not just the isolated act of a few bad men, but that it is in fact pervasive and endemic in our society. This man was the symptom, not the exception. In the aftermath, research interest and funding increased dramatically, leading to a wealth of data on the incidence, prevalence, and contours of violence against women, and the realization that violence against women is a gender issue. We also began to understand that violence is not confined to physical aggression, that it includes psychological, economic, and sexual harms. We know that it takes different forms and that it is often culturally and geographically specific. The perpetrators are spouses, partners, parents, other family members, neighbors, employers, and others. Studies show that upwards of 85% of the victims of domestic violence are women. And this type of violence results in more injuries to women than do sexual assault, mugging, and vehicle crashes combined. In 1993, the United Nations Declaration on the Elimination of Violence Against Women defined violence against women as any act of gender-based violence that results in or is likely to result in physical, sexual, or psychological harm or suffering to women, including threats of such acts, coercion, or arbitrary deprivation of liberty, whether occurring in public or in private life. Today, 1 in 3 girls in developing countries is likely to be married as a child bride. 140 million girls and women have suffered female genital mutilation. Millions of women and girls are trafficked in modern-day slavery, and rape is routinely used as a tactic of war. In Canada, 67% of Canadians know a woman who has experienced physical or sexual abuse. Indigenous women are killed at 6 times the rate of non-Indigenous women. More than 6,000 women and children sleep in shelters on any given night because it isn't safe at home. Violence against women is a manifestation of sex and gender inequality, but also serves to maintain what is ultimately an unequal balance of power. We have learned much from more than 40 years of research, but we have much more to learn and much, much more to do, because violence against women has increased in scope, transposing and relocating into a new space of human interaction, the internet. Online violence is now everywhere. Globally, the United Nations estimates that 73% of women have been exposed to or have experienced some kind of online abuse, including threats of blackmail, cyberstalking, rape, death, and sexual harassment. In October of this year, a landmark survey of women and girls' experiences with the internet in 22 countries, including Canada, reported that 58% of girls experience online harassment. Of those who have been harassed, nearly half were threatened with physical or sexual violence. As well, online threats of extreme violence against women and expressions of misogyny have been used by perpetrators as justifications for their actions in recent mass killings all over the world. And in Toronto, when a self-proclaimed soldier in the group calling themselves incels drove a van into a crowd of people on one of Toronto's busiest streets, killing 10 and injuring 14. Media accounts emphasize his personal characteristics and his past, but said almost nothing about the broader context that shaped his beliefs. Incels are an online subculture that is part of a larger constellation of groups making up what many social scientists call the manosphere. They believe that women owe them sex, that women are genetically inferior to men, and that feminism has destroyed men's so-called natural power. Their masculinity is threatened, and so they respond with threats and fantasies and sometimes actual acts of mass and gender-based violence. We know that incels tend to be young, depressed, desperate, and often suicidal. Groups like these are proliferating online, and we need to be mindful of the social climate in which this is happening. Between 2009 and 2017, there were 173 mass shootings in the United States. 19 of those were in 2019 alone. In Canada, there have been less than 20 mass shootings since the 1800s. But the internet has no borders. In the last decade, we have witnessed an increased presence and rise of the extreme right, who also claim a discourse of loss, injury, entitlement, and misogyny. Indeed, one common thread that connects these killings is a history of hating women, assaulting wives, girlfriends, and family female members, and sharing misogynistic views online. Another new challenge that we face is how technology is fueling the trafficking of women, facilitating cyberbullying, and many other forms of violence we don't even understand yet. Online abuse has become run-of-the-mill, everyday life for many, and women often lack access to the resources they need to challenge and combat online abuse. Too often they are not believed or taken seriously. Too often, the vile, threatening, and harassing nature of online discourse, what the scholar Emma Jane calls e-bile, is perceived as just flaming or boys being boys. We can try to fool ourselves into thinking that e-bile are just comments made by a handful of nasty people on Twitter. But the reality is that this is everyday language for a great many. When that language goes unchallenged, and when the ideas underpinning those words are unopposed, they become normalized. It creates an ecosystem that allows, celebrates, and often encourages woman abuse. The shockingly high number of girls worldwide who are subject to abuse every time they participate in the discussions online, in addition to being hassled and harassed on the street when they step outside their homes, means that there is no space, virtual or otherwise, where girls are safe and free from violence. One consequence is that girls are reporting long-term mental health problems, and in many cases are opting out of expressing themselves and their opinions for fear of retribution, and sometimes removing themselves from these platforms altogether. They're experiencing fear and exclusion from the opportunities that the internet presents. On the internet, the incels, among other groups, are pressing what they call their black pill ideology. This ideology essentially argues that there is no escape, no hope in their lives. It represents the pessimism and the hopelessness that frames their venomous attacks on women. We've been slow to acknowledge this problem. It's well known that the police waited too long when the Montreal Massacre happened. They simply did not intervene quickly enough to prevent one of the deadliest mass shootings in Canadian history. And last year, the city of Montreal changed the wording on the plaque commemorating the massacre, which originally described it as a tragic event, to the words anti-feminist violence. It is significant that the city finally recognized what happened at École Polytechnique in December of 1989 for what it was and is. It is telling that it took 30 years. It was just in 2018 that both the Southern Law Poverty Center and the Anti-Defamation League first addressed the issue of male supremacy and misogynist ideology. To paraphrase the philosopher Julia Penelope, if we do not name these things, they are rendered invisible. We need to cultivate a zero-tolerance policy and culture. We need to improve counter-violent extremism programming. We need to monitor and manage extremists, especially online. Taken to its extreme, the black pill ideology can lead to violence, but the focus on incels as potential killers risks missing a much more subtle threat, that they will commit acts of everyday violence ranging from harassment to violent assault, or simply make the women in their lives miserable. We have been slow to name this problem for what it is, and we've been slow to act. On an individual level, we have a responsibility to report abuse and draw attention to perpetrators. We also need to put pressure on social media companies and the tech industry to develop unbiased algorithms and policies to prevent and stop online harassment. As a society, we should reflect on why some people consider harassment as a form of entertainment. We have to transform disapproval into action. I would say one of the most important things we can do is to engage men in changing their own behavior more than protecting women and girls. Because there's nothing wrong with women and girls. If men's behavior changes, there will be no need to protect women and girls. We can definitely take lessons from other countries like Germany, which in 2017 adopted the Network Enforcement Act. This law requires social media platforms to remove hate speech and other controversial or offensive content within 24 hours. Failure to remove that content can lead to fines of up to 50 million euro. And new amendments made in 2020 now bind social media companies, in addition to deleting posts within 24 hours, to report criminal content to the German Federal Criminal Police Office. In Uganda and some parts of South Africa, intimate partner violence more than halved when gender norms were tackled. We may want to take a moment and think about how many of the recent hate killings have been done by young males, either late teens or early 20s, who have been radicalized into this level of entitled, hate-filled misogyny by online groups that exploit and reinforce toxic messaging to young, impressionable people. As the 19th century writer and activist Frederick Douglass reminds us, it is easier to build strong children than to repair broken men. And let's not also forget that the perpetrator of the Montreal Massacre had hated women since he was a child. The time has long passed for our society to debate whether gender-based violence is a real problem. We need a comprehensive, multi-sectoral approach to end this misery and suffering. We need better education and awareness training. We need to empower girls and young women. We need to interrogate pervasive and perverse gender norms. We need to change the way women and girls are depicted. We need to build our understanding of radicalization and confront it head on. We need to build better resources to address mental health issues. And we must harness technology to serve the common good so that acts of terror like that of December 6, 1989 never happen again. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Dr. Shahid Alvi. I would like to now call upon Rachel Lenz, a fourth-year mechanical engineering student, to read the names of the 14 women whose lives were lost and the lighting of the candle. We ask that you please stand for the candle lighting and remain standing for a moment of silence.
I'll begin by reading the names and then proceed by lighting a candle for each name. And then this will be followed by the moment of silence. Geneviève Bergeron, Hélène Colgan, Nathalie Croteau, Barbara Dagneau, Anne-Marie Edouard, Maude Avernier, Marie Slagagnard, Anne-Marie Lemay, Sonia Pelletier, Michel Richard, Annie Saint-Arnaud, Annie Turcotte, Barbara Kluznik-Wojciechowicz, please remain standing for a moment of silence. Thank you.
As the ceremony comes to a conclusion, I would like to thank the Faculty of Engineering and Applied Science for helping us organize today's memorial. I would also like to thank each and every one of you who took your time to attend this event to remember those who were lost, the lives lived, reflect on the ways we can prevent such incidents in the future, and ensure respect and safety for each member of our community.
As a female engineering student, I am grateful for how our society has come in terms of working to stop violence against women and other historically marginalized groups. I am also grateful to all the females who have consistently broken barriers, fighting for our gender equality, and dispelling myths and stereotypes about what women are capable of. And finally, we are also grateful for the community that surrounds us and that has supported and encouraged us along our personal and academic journeys. It is our responsibility as both a university and as a community to continue to spread awareness of ongoing gender-based discrimination and violence. This awareness must lead to actions and changes at the university itself. Together, we also have a shared responsibility to support our female students and marginalized groups as they develop into the forward-thinking leaders that we need in today's world. I ask the men in this community to continue to stand by your sisters, mothers, wives, friends, and colleagues, and to encourage them to reach further heights. Do not be afraid to stand up for what you believe in. And as we end our ceremony today, we want to thank you for participating in this memorial service and invite you to reflect on the violence that remains a daily reality for girls and women around the world and in our community. Change starts with a single person, so let your voice be heard.
We encourage you to share an action or a recommendation that the university or yourself personally might take to put an end to the acts of gender-based violence and discrimination. We also ask that you consider how gender intersects with class, race, and disability, for example, and welcome your thoughts and ideas. We ask that your recommendation or actions be placed on the message board. The message board is located at the bottom of the website page that was created for this event, which is below the video link. Following the ceremony, these items will be shared with our campus community. Thank you again.